Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest here is Susan McLaughlin. I'll let you introduce yourself. I'm really excited to talk to you about intra-abdominal pressure.
Sure. Thanks, Stewart. I'm Susan McLaughlin, and I practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I have my own private practice as a physical therapist where I have a specialization in the pelvic area. So I work with men and women who have pelvic issues. And so that could be anywhere from, leaking urine to pain to abdominal wall issues. So, men and women have abdominal wall separation as well as, hernias. So, that's a big draw when it comes to intra-abdominal pressure. And also I work with a lot of women postpartum after having their babies who are experiencing pelvic organ prolapse. And so coming from this realm of, this niche of the pelvic area, I really feel like it's made me a better therapist because I've really had to look at more than just the musculoskeletal system. So it's really, my eyes are focused on the whole body. I've always been interested in a holistic approach, really have a deep respect for the nervous system and how the nervous system is driving our connective tissue, our fascia, and the musculoskeletal system. So that's kind of the way I practice. Is I do a lot of hands-on work as well as supporting the system to integrate for things to do at home. I'm a big proponent of self-care, and also a big proponent that the body knows how to heal itself. We just want to be able to provide the best opportunity or the best environment for the system to heal. So I really know that everyone has the ability to be well and healthy. And sometimes it's a road and sometimes it's a journey. And I had my own journey of living in chronic pain for about 10 years and was really able to transition out of it. And I was able to transition out of it, I think, when I stopped trying in a way. I was really I kind of dove into this learning in pelvic health. And in this learning, I was like, oh my God, like I'm learning, the digestive system and the reproductive system and the urinary system and this whole fascial system of the pelvis. And I was just like devouring information. And so that's when I came upon a training. I was really piqued by, there was a blog going around at the time. This was around 2007. It was No More Kegels was the blog. And so with pelvic health, when you do the training, a lot of it is like, let's do your Kegels, 100 Kegels a day. And what I found in practice was some people did really well with that. And then some people just didn't. There was like no improvements. And so in that, I was really curious what's going on here, why there has to be more than just the Kegel. So I was drawn into this blog and really kind of took me down a rabbit hole of doing some learning with one of my mentors, Katie Bowman, whose business is called Nutritious Movement now. It was restorative exercise at the time. So it really brought my eyes to really looking at this whole body experience even more. How we move and use our body in the day-to-day plays out in our tissues. And so when I was doing my training, I was just doing all the moves. I had like a daily practice of just moving and just learning, an hour or so a day, or maybe even more sometimes, because it just felt good. And like, 3 months down the road, and I'm like, I don't have pain anymore. So I wasn't like, I didn't do the training to get out of pain. I did the training for learning to help other people, but I had the benefit getting out of pain.
And
So
I feel like that's a common pathway in.
oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And so this, you said abdominal wall, and I want to understand a lot more of that. What are the components of the abdominal wall, and how does it relate to the pelvic floor?
Right. So when I'm saying abdominal wall, that's the muscles in the front. So you're probably aware of rectus abdominis, and then the three layers of do you want me to name the muscles?
Sure. Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
We have the three, yeah. So we have the 3-layered body wall. So external oblique, internal oblique, and then that innermost layer is the transversus abdominis. So that's the muscle that, a lot of gets trained a lot in draw your belly button to the spine. So that's kind of that cue of drawing in and engaging that deep abdominal muscle. So when we're talking about abdominal wall, I'm referring to that whole system and that whole fascial system too, because we're moving in our trunk, the abdominal wall is, they're attaching into sheaths. And so we have this integrity in the center, and that's the linea alba. So when we're looking at that abdominal wall separation, Diane Lee has just published some good research on they're looking at the distance and the tension across that linea alba. It's not as much about the width of the separation. We want to be looking at that tension. Exactly. Yeah. So the relationship is there, the pelvic floor and the abdominal wall and the diaphragm are part of a team working alongside with our speaking mechanism, our vocal apparatus, because this is a part of our pressure system too.
Interesting. And that's the thing I was going to say, was that when I teach people about the pelvic floor, I teach it with breath and with breath instruction. And it's the hardest one for a lot of people to get because it feels so subtle for a lot of people. And it's taken me a long time to understand what the pelvic floor is, what it comprises of, where it is exactly. And I imagine a lot of this has to do with trauma, but I think it also has to do with just the way that we walk around the earth, and particularly with the feet, the connection between the feet. Like yesterday I had this massage, one of my favorite massage people, he's in the fascia group, Daniel Sanson. He does this Thai massage acro yoga, where he'll put me up in the air. And then he had me in a back bend basically, and my adductor muscles it felt like they were for the first time able to really like stretch out in a way that was really cool. And my adductors, I believe they attach to the pubic bone, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was just like this amazing opening experience that goes directly into the pelvic floor. And so it's like this center of movement, but most people don't know where it is. Do you find that in your clinical experience as well, teaching people about the pelvic floor, that they don't really, I mean, I guess if they're coming to you, they know what the pelvic floor is a little bit at least, right?
Not always, honestly, not always. And so, I do feel like it's something out of sight, out of mind. It's not something we can always like see. And a lot of times, to be honest, I really feel like most people in our culture, but I would say maybe even globally, I'm not sure, we are not good breathers. And so in that, we're just not getting that excursion. So when we're not getting movement, the brain can't find it. So it's kind of like, I always say, it's like it's there, but it's like we have duct tape around it. And so it's not getting a clear message. So,
and it does move. It does move with the breath. When we take a big inhale, it does move, right?
It does move.
Yeah. It
does move. And, there's some really great people who have education online. Julie Wiebe calls it the pelvic floor piston with the diaphragm, where, you get that, you see that motion. Pilates has actually, I don't know what group it is, but they've used that ultrasound imaging where you can see the movement. That's really cool to see. So I think I think conceptually it can be really confusing because it really hasn't been moving as much during the breath. And honestly, it's so, it's a part of our survival, our inner core, our fascial system, it's so connected to our survival that it comes under our radar. That's why appreciating the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, it's our survival. So we're going to have ways that we hold our breath unknowingly during the day due to life happening. And so that's where that maybe a mindfulness practice can be helpful, because then you're becoming more aware of how you're moving and using your body in the day. I've been doing a study, part of the education that I'm really interested in is the pre and perinatal time period. And so I'm doing a year-long education right now. And in one of the books that I was reading, it was talking about, we have better techniques of identifying what's going on in utero right now. And so what I was reading was a woman taking a drink. This was like maybe a 1 ounce shot of vodka. Now, with that vodka in the system, the fetus holds its breath. Because it's an insult to the system. So it's holding its breath. So imagine as we're primed in this, we don't think about in utero all of the times we're holding our breath in reaction to our environment. So we're born not breathing well.
And then I imagine the stress of the mother as well sends stress hormones, and I imagine that the glucosteroids and the CRH and all of those stress hormones are also making an effect on the infant's body as well in the system.
Right. So to me, that's mind-blowing. It's like, because a lot of times people are like, well, I didn't have trauma. Well, I mean, trauma, the big T trauma, the little t trauma is falling off a bike. How many times do you fall off a bike? And
you have that stress response, and that causes an autonomic thing that we're just not aware of, particularly when we're younger. Yeah. And this is the weird thing about growing up, is that we have this ability to then influence our autonomic nervous system. Like for some people, they get it really young and they can do mindfulness really easily, but for most people, it's like a huge challenge to establish influence or to say, maybe not the best word, but control over the autonomic nervous system. It's for most people, it's a huge challenge. And then all these little kind of things, and then we all experience stress, and it's all subjective. So I love how they've only recently come up with the term biophysical social makeup. It's like, some people have been thinking about that for a long time, but it's the new term. And I guess it's important to have these new terms as well. So.
Sure. But I love your interest in breath, because I do feel like of within that autonomic nervous system, the breath is one thing we can do to change our state. So that there is a key right there in working with people in pain states, and to also look at it, whether you're in a pain state or someone is coming in with, for me, leaking urine or abdominal wall separation. It's we want to be able to manage pressures. So in order to manage pressures, we need to get movement. And in order to strengthen a muscle, we need to have movement. So that breath is a bridge that is going to be tapping into the autonomic nervous system. And it's also going to be getting that movement in the system. And it's also going to be changing our pH. So I think that ability for that oxygen molecule to be delivered is huge, because if it's not being delivered, it's just going to loop here at this, at our brainstem.
And this gets into something I remember the question that I wanted to ask you about the postural role of the intra-abdominal pressure and maybe the diaphragm. I guess that's the better question. What is the postural role in the diaphragm, and how do you teach people to get more into that postural realm? Because this is a personal question for me, because I've noticed that my postural part of my diaphragm is not totally tuned in, and it seems related to paradoxical breathing. I had paradoxical for breathing for a long time, and now I've essentially, it feels like I've healed myself, and I now breathe into my side ribs and get full lateral rib expansion and stuff like that. But this postural element still is kind of beyond me and I'm just curious how you share that with people.
Yeah, that's a good question, Stewart, because I do feel like that's something that is counterintuitive to what we know of as good posture.
Yep.
Which is that, that upright, bring the shoulders back, and then, reel in the neck. And our posture is driven by our autonomic nervous system. It's driven by our nervous system.
Whoa.
So if we're in an alert state, or if we're in collapse, our body is going to fall into that. And so we may have a hard time making that posture happen. So sometimes how I will approach the system is really working on tending to the nervous system and offering a client what I would call positional or constructive rest positions, so the body can start to drop in and reduce muscle tension.
Mm.
And then as there's more ease in the system, approaching that, that idea of stacking our bones and stacking the rib cage over the pelvis, so you have that primed canister. Again, Julie Weebs talks a lot about that in the positioning, and sometimes that is hard to find. It can feel really contrived. One of the things that I really like to do as I have people stand is, the analogy that I use is a lot of times what I see happening is our body is always, I would say, instinctively wanting to conserve energy. So we're going to maybe default into a rest position. And so one of the rest positions that we tend to do is we let that pelvis
go forward,
just sway forward, right? And so I call it a kickstand. It's like the hip joint is kickstanding into the front of the capsule, and we're just kind of riding in a tuck. So we don't have that good leverage of the pelvic floor. And a lot of times what's happening on the top could be sunken down, or it could be extra lifted up. So one of the things that I like to do to have people find more of that plumb line is to come up into standing how they normally stand. And then I cue them to innately bring in what I would call a balance strategy, or it's not I call it, it just is a balance strategy. It's a hip strategy. So like if we bend forward, our hips are going to have to move back so we don't fall, right? So if I just move forward, we would just fall flat on our face. So to bring in that hip strategy, what I cue people to do is look down to the inside of your arches or the inside of your ankle bones. And as you do that, most people, unless they're really just trying to move their head, most people will just innately, the pelvis shifts back a little bit. And so what happens is you get this great stacking of that rib cage over the pelvis, and that diaphragm then goes from maybe that up position to that just right position. And so that's one of the ways I like to teach it. And that's coming from, I've modified it a little bit from the work that I did with Katie Bowman as one of her teaching assistants. It's a great program. I don't know if she's teaching anybody anymore, but that seemed to, like for me, I have to say, I really feel like finding that postural ease helped me get out of chronic back and hip pain.
And that it seems related to fascia, because I believe that we know that it takes about 2 years to remodel fascia. So it takes a really long time for a lot of this stuff. It feels like I've been doing it for, so I think I was 21 when so I've been doing it for about 13 years. And I now find, like, I think I'm in the last couple of months of kind of like really dialing in and figuring out how to find that comfortable ease while walking, while doing all these different things. And it just takes so long for most people. Would you say that that's accurate, or it depends on the person, basically?
I don't know. I would say it depends on the person.
Yeah.
It is interesting because, you know, there's so many different layers to a pain experience. So that's hard to say.
Yeah. So let's go through a little of the layers. So I know from, I'm forgetting his name. He's a pain scientist in Vancouver. He gives a lot of good information about what to do when your client's in pain, are in pain as a yoga teacher, or what, you know, and says the primary thing is safety. So you want to bring them into a sense of safety. So, and then have them ask themselves, will this activity hurt me later on? And then as they start to do it, it's like choose a gentle, challenging activity, or come to the, like, kind of the end range of motion come to the edge of increased pain, and then kind of figure out in that increased pain what you're capable of, what is too much. And then over time you kind of heal. And then the other thing that I really liked what he said was that pain, I didn't like this part. It was really annoying, but pain interrupts breath, body sensations, thinkings, and emotions. Would you say all of that's accurate, or do you have any things you'd like?
I would agree. Is this Neil Pearson?
That's it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he has a great system going on for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree. I would wholeheartedly agree. And, you know, here's the thing: when it comes to intra-abdominal pressure, it's like most people coming into me are worried about, you know, going back to the gym, doing their Zumba, or doing their plank and doing their curl up. But I have to tell you, it's the everyday pressures, because, you know, actually, oh my gosh, what's her first name? Anyway, her last name, Nygaard. She's here in Salt Lake. She's a researcher. She studied pressures, intra-abdominal pressures. So we know some of the main, you know, bigger pressures. Coughing, vomiting is huge. When we hold our breath, those are big pressures. So one of the things, you know, people will come in my office and they're like, oh yeah, I know I'm a breath holder. Oh yeah, I know I hold my breath. So imagine if someone can recognize that they hold their breath, and can they change that? Imagine how, you know, you're offloading, because it's all about the loads to the system. So if you can change the load to the system, you can change how your tissues are functioning, and you can change how your fascia, or that linea alba, or the, you know, the pelvic organ supports, how they're supporting you. So you need to do a breath hold if you're going to lift heavy crap over your head. But you don't need to hold your breath when you're bending down to pick up your socks off the floor. But we do. Most people do.
And that has all these effects in the posture. And I wonder what the effect is of the catastrophizing of a lot of people about, like, oh, you have to have this perfect posture when you're moving and when you're picking stuff up. And I wonder how much of that actually, like, made my process of healing longer, was from this kind of like expectation of pain, which then creates pain.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's big.
Yeah. So I'd love to go, we got the pelvic floor, and then we got the diaphragm, and then we also have this voice box, and this, like, the hyoid bone, and and then the pressures that have changed from our voice as well. And then TMJ, which is really interesting, because it feels like the thing that's wrong, or that feels off about my TMJ, it's not necessarily something physiological, although part of it is, but I feel like a lot of it has to do with stress, particularly of stress when I was younger, and it felt like a clamping down, like grinding. I guess that's a question. How much is grinding related to intra-abdominal pressure and the pelvic floor?
I would say a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A lot, because that's kind of giving you the information about the state of the autonomic nervous system. So
Mm-hmm.
the tension's high there. The body is in a defense response. So the key is finding ways to bring in more of that regulation.
Mm-hmm.
To
Regulation of the breath. Yeah.
to find the safety, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of different ways. If you've done any research into the polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges and the work there, just this whole the cranial nerves are really, really important in waking up the vagal tone.
Mm-hmm.
And also, also the central nervous system too. It's like, I think we forget how amazing, like I was, you've probably done this with the work that you've done, but just doing some work with, I took a training with Lois Laney and restorative breathing. Have you checked out her stuff?
I haven't. I mean, I've done a lot of breath practices, so I imagine that I've come across something similar. And I have a question about a particular breath practice that I'd like to know from you. But I'd love to hear more about her stuff.
Yeah. So what she really likes to make sure the cranial nerves are online, and especially what's happening in our mouth and our jaw and our tongue. So just doing some things to stimulate the tongue, whether that's getting a fork and scraping the fork back to front, back to front, back to front, and swallowing. So engaging these mechanisms here of the vocal folds. And I really like to use, in order to relax the pelvic floor, I really like to use a deeper sound. If you do that, like I can feel my pelvic floor going, ooh. It's like women who are giving birth, they will innately be making these sounds that are just kind of like really low. And that's really allowing that compliance in the pelvic floor. A higher pitch is going to elevate my pelvic floor. So just by hearing someone speak, a lot of times you can get a sense of what's the resonance like in the system. How's the team working together?
And then, so the question I have about a specific breath practice is this: there's a breath practice that I've been starting for the last few months called intermittent hypoxia training.
Yeah.
And then, there are pranayama forms of it, which are much older, but none that I've found that are specific to the intermittent hypoxia, at least the first stage of that, which is the breathing very, very slowly and gently and long until you get a sense of air hunger, and then building up to pauses and stuff like that. And there's been a lot of research now, right? It's now coming out in the research that this is actually very effectual, right?
Yeah. So that sounds like very similar to the Boteko breathing method out of Russia or Siberia. I think it's amazing. Now, I think it's hard to do. Like when I started really kind of getting into the breathing, when I took my training with Lois, she does have you do that hypoxic after the exhale. And that was really challenging for me. And also the longer exhale is challenging for me too. So, if you think about a startle response, it's that inhale with a hold. So there's this hold on the inhale. There's not a big long exhale. That inhale is paired with the sympathetic nervous system. The exhale is the parasympathetic. And so, that breath pattern, when I read the books, Patrick McEwen's Shut Your Mouth, and a couple of the other ones, helping with anxiety, and I find it challenging. They're really specific, and so what I tend to do is I tend to practice the just slowing my exhale down, and just for me, this is just for me. But I've kind of, I kind of do a modified version just because I don't have asthma and I don't have anxiety. So I don't have those kind of symptoms, but I do, I do have a charge in my system. So I'm constantly needing to bring in that vagal tone. So that's one of the things I think is amazing.
And so what about lateral rib expansion? I took a lot of trainings with Harvey Deutsch, and he's a physical therapist who got really into yoga, and he became a yoga teacher as well and brings a lot of the science behind it. And he helped me understand that the lateral rib expansion in terms of regulation is one of the most helpful things you can do. And for me, like I've got on my right side, I've got these like intense, what feels like fascial adhesions, but I really don't know what they are, but they're around the right rib, right floating rib, and all the way back to the quadratus lumborum, and they're related to the transversus abdominis and the whole abdominal wall, it seems like. And then the left side of, they got this weird crunching that I can kind of have this conscious control over. And then the lateral rib expansion over time is allowing me to really kind of unwind those adhesions that seem very related to the breath and having asthma and having paradoxical breathing and stuff like that. I wonder if you might give any insight on that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yes, I'm a big proponent of getting movement into the rib cage. And that, yes, the lateral rib expansion is really important. However, one of the things that I do notice when we're learning something, what I find is there's this tendency, as because we're human, we like to really do it and overdo it. And so, I can make that movement happen outside of the breathing experience, right? I mean, I can do that just with changing pressure. So there is a tendency to kind of really, I think in the beginning, maybe to overdo rather than finding it. But I do find that doing myofascial work or doing work using balls like those 9-inch core Pilates balls are amazing. And Jill Miller, who does a lot with her Gorgeous program, doing a lot of ball rolling and ball to the side. It's a really, really cool way to get into just finding some of that mobility within the rib cage, and also being able to I really like using our nerve centers. So even just doing a sternal hold here, doing a heart hold. This is, just something from Peter Levine, where you're just giving yourself a heart hug or a heart hold, and just waiting until you feel that breath change. So I love this area. And so you can do these holds in a release position or in a sitting position, and just allowing that time for your system to transition into that parasympathetic response. And, I think I was reading something the other day that it can take anywhere from 20 minutes to 30 minutes to come out of, that mobilization response and into the E. So sometimes we're just not giving ourselves enough time to decompress from the day or decompress from an event. So I love giving those nurturing aspects for home care, because that is a big part of self-care that I feel like we're just going on to the next. And, if someone certainly doesn't have time for that, even doing a 1 minute breathing pause or a 3 breath pause, that can go a long, long way.
That's the most interesting thing I'm dealing with currently, is just like people's perception of what breath work or what meditation or what any sort of breath training is, and the difference between that and what it actually is, and the amount of fear that comes up, that for most people like to go into the breath, and I mean, I used to think it as well. I used to have the same stuff, but it's been so long for me since, like, now I recognize it as all good. And I'm so curious, because it's essentially at least it was for me, a fear of the sympathetic nervous system. I'm sorry, the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest situation, because that was so foreign, I guess. And also I think it has something to do with the cultural influence of living in a city, and to a certain extent capitalism, and kind of having to be on a lot of the time, and then this stress response helps you to be on, whereas like resting is kind of not considered productive.
Yeah. Certainly. Yeah. Yeah, and also, if you consider if the system has been in a state of that up, when the body does find that, um, it can be scary too, because it's like something must be wrong,
Mm.
right? Something must be wrong. That's not my normal. So I can imagine that's a big shift.
Are you familiar with the cranial sacral term, like a still point?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do
Mhm.
you think the still point is? If you, I mean, I can't imagine there's much research on the still point itself, but if you were to venture a guess or kind of think about it, what do you think a still point would be in terms of physiological response?
You know what? That's a good question. And I did take years ago, I think back in 2002, maybe, I took a Cranial One course. And, I think the training is the kind of tracking the cerebral spinal fluid.
Yep.
Um, but I don't know what the still point is. That's a good question.
And this is something, an interesting categorization I heard of body work is that there's four different parts of the body or regions of the body or like functional separations of the body that we can manipulate. There's the joints, and that would be a chiropractor. There's the muscles and the fascia, and that would be a trigger point massage. And then there's the viscera, which would be an organ massage or a belly rub. And then there's the nervous system, which they put cranial sacral under, which is like you're putting your hands on their back of their head. And it's so interesting, the back of the head. I've been having some pretty powerful releases over the past 2 days, and it has to do with the back of the head and the relationship with the TMJ and the bite, which was it took me a long time to realize that connection at an experiential level. And so there's something really interesting about the muscles of the that are related to the parasympathetic nerves, and then the ones that are the sympathetic nerves. And it makes sense given the core's ability to like move and stuff like that. But then just like putting your hands on somebody's back of their head feels amazing. Like,
It is amazing.
yeah.
It is amazing. Yeah, I'm really drawn to the work of just understanding the nervous system more. So I've done a lot of just some self-study with reading books, Peter Levine's books on somatic experiencing, but then there's a training online with the nervous system that I really have enjoyed. It's Irene Lyon, who's someone who has gone through the somatic experiencing training, as well as she's a Feldenkrais practitioner. So I feel like she's really put a solid online program up there to understanding, putting the power in the hands of the person. Like, this is your nervous system. We all should know about the nervous system, but unless you kind of go into this track of healthcare or massage or whatever, you don't really learn and to understand what's going on with your body. So I really love that she kind of empowers people in educating what is the nervous system, and here are some neurosensory tools to help you connect to your system. So I think that is really great. And what I was going to say is kind of learning through her program. One of the people that she took work from was Kathy Kane, and her practice is called somatic practice. And so her background is a massage therapist, and she's coming to working with people with trauma from that background. And so one of her trainings that I actually went to worked with touch skills for working with the organs of stress. So the brain stem here is a huge organ of stress. So to be able to hold and support and even just cradle that brain stem and give the nervous system the support to, it's like giving permission, time, and support. You have this person, you have this other who is going to tend to the nervous system and be with you as it transitions into regulation. But we don't always get that in the day-to-day. It feels really good.
Sometimes we get the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my teachers, Jim Burns, he does orthobionomy, and he talks a lot about if you look at two cells in the petri dish, and the stronger of the cells will kind of like take over or influence the other cell. And he talks about that as being like, we're in these individual bodysuits, and kind of what you're doing when you're giving somebody that space is you're becoming the stronger cell temporarily, which they can essentially just kind of relax into. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
So this has been really cool. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. And how can people, if they liked what you're talking about, find out more about you and your practice?
Yeah, great. So my website is alignforhealth.com, and I usually write a blog every month. So if you're interested in catching that blog, sign up for my newsletter. I'll just send out a newsletter if I've written a blog. And then I think I'm kind of old school. I'm only on Facebook. I don't have an Instagram account. So my business is Align, and my tags are integration and movement. So my Facebook is Align, Integration, and Movement.
Very
so
cool.
You can find me on Facebook as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.